When looking at these images, you probably don't think much of them. You see a man in his 40s with his daughter, both seem happy and healthy. But when I look at these images, I see a completely different story behind those smiling faces. You can't tell, but my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. In November of 2013, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, stage 4 colon cancer, and that was pretty much like the end of the world for a 9-year-old girl. I had just turned 9 and found out my dad might die. My dad was always the life of the party, the life of the party. Like, I'm not just saying that, like, he was genuinely the life of the party. Spoons on her nose, dancing all the time. And for a 9-year-old girl, watching her dad change from staying up and dancing with her to One Direction to falling asleep on the couch at 7 because of treatment was probably one of the hardest things to cope with in the beginning. And I know it's hard to imagine what a 9-year-old girl felt. And to be honest, a lot of the early years are a blur at this point. It's been a while. But my dad wasn't really that different. I mean, we golfed every weekend and went out to dinner a lot. And the first time I was truly scared for him was the first time I saw an oxygen tank at the house. I didn't want to ask about it, but I did. Because seeing an oxygen tank in your house means something is not working the way it should be. That means there's some sort of supplement that he needs because something isn't doing its job. And for a 9-year-old, maybe I was 10 or 11, I don't know what that's like now, but I was terrified. And my dad told me it was nothing to worry about. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be very, very strong. And I asked, and he said it was okay, it was nothing. And looking back on it, it probably was something to be scared of. You know, it's unfamiliar, it's new, and definitely not something small. Most of the sick days I took in middle school were because I didn't know how to get through the day while having to worry about him. I mean, I had friends and family who were, I could talk to them, but I couldn't really because what other 11 or 12-year-old has to see their dad deteriorate? I know a few, which I'll talk about later, but I don't know any at the time when this was happening. I was alone, and I felt alone, and I didn't know how to get through the days while having to do school and deal with friends and drama and middle school things, like what happened in middle school. I don't know. I was worried about my dad with cancer. Oh gosh. I was the kind of person who loves to laugh and make others laugh. I'm always screaming and dancing. You can ask anyone who knows me. I am very much like this man that you see before you. And I was scared that if I opened up to my friends, they would just feel bad for me. I thought that I didn't want them to see me sad. That's not who I am. I am not a sad person. And in middle school, a lot of people would just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That's the default response when someone's going through something traumatic. You think, "Oh, I am so sorry." I did not want that. I still do not want that. I do not want you to feel bad for me. This is a sad story, warning, but I don't want you to feel bad. I don't want you to say sorry to me. I want you to be there and understand. I want you to open your ears and listen. Because this is not something easy to go through for anyone. My dad joined Fight CRC, which is a colon cancer advocacy group, and I became a junior advocate. I found myself surrounded by hardworking people who had cancer or who had parents who had cancer, and they were now adults. And this helped me a lot. The group even opened me up to new things. At age 13, I went to Washington, D.C. and spoke to representatives of Pennsylvania congressmen in order to spread awareness and pass healthcare bills. We really tug at their heartstrings, and it kind of gets them moving, And now, actually, recently, as of a few days ago, they're pushing for colon cancer screening to be at age 45 instead of 50. When I was in DC, someone came and spoke to the junior advocates about a camp called Camp Kesem. It's a nonprofit organization run through colleges all over the country that are here to support kids whose parents have or had cancer. And I feel like we often talk about people with cancer and children with cancer, but we don't often think about their caregivers who go through so much. And I would like to mention that at this time, the end of middle school, things weren't really working for my dad. Chemo stopped working. My stepmom is a doctor and ended up finding experimental treatments for my dad to apply to, which most cancer patients don't get into one. My dad got into 4 over this 5.5-year span, which is beyond impressive. But it's really quite sad, isn't it? That, the thing that's meant to help doesn't. It was definitely scary. And immediately I texted my mom begging her to sign me up for camp. And I was never told that my dad would probably die. Till one day I was in the car, my stepmom was driving me to dinner, and she looked at me. My dad was not in the car. I do not think that he knows about this conversation. And she said to me, it has been 5.5 years, or it was 5 years of nonstop chemo, surgery, and trials. It's not too bad right now. We don't know what's going to happen. It's not super likely that things will get better, but for right now, time is being bought. We've got a lot of time for now. And that was the first time that I think we ever really talked about what the outcome might be. My dad was very optimistic. He never, ever wanted me to think that he was sick. He wanted to be a dad. He found out he had cancer when I was 9, and he said that is not a 9-year-old girl who is going to grow up without a dad. And he fought very, very hard and partied hard too. Lots of parties. And for a 13-year-old at this point, things got really, 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 really rough because I was starting to realize that things weren't getting better. Things were just going. They were on and on and on of just the same things over and over. I was 13 years old and realizing I will probably have to grow up the rest of my life without my dad, which he did not know I felt this way. But I was realizing he wouldn't see me go to prom or drive or graduate, high school or college, maybe, you don't know. And it was awful. I was a 13-year-old realizing I'd live the rest of my life with no dad. That's insane. So then I got to go to Kesem. This is one of the most eye-opening experiences that has ever happened to me. I walked into registration, my mom with me. I have my big bags and all sorts of things. And she said, wow, there are so many of you. And I'm over here, oh my God, who am I gonna meet? What am I gonna say? I'm so excited. I'm gonna have such a good time. And I know it's tragic for someone who doesn't get it, but to someone who felt lost and alone, this was the first time that I felt seen. And we didn't have to talk about cancer to be seen. It was an unspoken thing that we all were connected by. And for an outsider who doesn't understand, to look at a group of over 100 kids, and this is just one chapter, there's a lot of us. Maybe not as many as there are in our school or anything, in our state, but there's quite a few of us, and it's sad. Like, the fact that these people have to go through it too, breaks my heart. And we have one event called Empowerment, which is really the only day we talk about cancer because the camp is meant to just feel like a kid for once, get away from chemo, just live life as a child. We sit in a spiral circle, and you're allowed to stand up and talk if you want. You don't have to. There's no rules about it. And nothing has impacted me more than watching a 9-year-old girl stand up and begin to talk, but she can't quite get through the words without choking up. I feel for her. I feel with her. I was her. After the big group, we split up into our cabins, and I don't think anything besides the 9-year-old girl has impacted me more than seeing girls my age talk about situations that were similar, not the same. I had friends who were going through things that I had gone through or things that I was going through, all different stages. Some people whose parents are still alive, some whose aren't. And it was really quite beautiful. Obviously, camp has changed to keep everyone safe. The past 2 years, so last year and this year, have to be virtual because we have cancer patients for parents. But it's still magical. It's still special, even though it's different. My dad went on a trip to Arizona. This was when things started to go downhill. He got a cold, And for a cancer patient, a cold can be a major game changer. Major. He ended up being flown home on an ambulance airplane. I was 14 and spending Thanksgiving in the ICU with my dad, who was on oxygen and had all the machines beeping and doing their thing. And we just sat there and talked, but he could barely talk because of the surgeries he was going through. Then, Christmas, it was at home, not in the hospital this time, thank goodness. Oxygen tank, breathing equipment, all sorts of equipment. And it was scary, really scary. So this picture is from the beginning of my freshman year, probably December. This is March. That's 4 months. And I'm 14 in both of these pictures. It's not far apart. That's not the same person. My dad never, ever looked sick till then. Couldn't hide it anymore. He was someone I was told was going to beat the odds, and in many ways he did. He was told he wouldn't have much time. But I watched a person I was told was going to be the one to survive turn into a living skeleton. He had barely any muscle because he was stuck in a hospital bed for months, and he could barely talk. He was whispering, clearly on oxygen. And I got in the car after this, and I bawled, sobbed. I did not want to see my dad. I was scared of him. I am happy that I saw him, but I wish with every part of my being that he did not look like that. After this night, I saw him at the school musical. He was in a wheelchair, and everyone knew he was coming because it was a very big deal, because I had to make arrangements and do all sorts of things so that he could sit in that front row in a wheelchair and oxygen. And everyone knew he was sick, but before he could hide it. And now everyone saw how bad it was. And I could tell people were doing that little side glance thing that's like, oh, what's wrong with them? And I was very, very, very uncomfortable. I did not want pictures with him. I did not want to be near him because I was embarrassed. I was ashamed and I was mad. I was furious that everyone else's parents were standing and walking and breathing without help. And they were hugging their kids and everyone was looking at him. My issues were on display. You couldn't hide it. And it was terrible. So then it's spring break, and I'm ready to go back to school. The night before spring break is ending, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to school. That little anticipation where you can't sleep that night. And then in the morning, my mom woke me up, and she was on the phone with my stepmom, which is very strange. Probably one of the weirdest things that's come out of all of this. But they were on the phone, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not right. And I knew something was up, and I wouldn't be going back to school that day. Instead, I was in the car on the way to the ICU instead of on the bus. And I knew that this was it. This was it. So then we get to the ICU, and I'm sitting there in the waiting room all day. The entire day, we just sat waiting, family, friends, everyone, just waiting. My dad was asleep most of the day, and we just sat there waiting. And I will genuinely tell you right now, there is not a single emotion to put for the anticipation of death. Monday, April 22nd, 2019 at 7:48 p.m. That was it. It was over. 5.5 years, and it was over like that. I was a 14-year-old with no dad. Family members come out of the room, and they come up to me and they say, hey, do you want to see him? And I said, sure, I would love to. My older sister comes and follows, because she didn't want me to go alone, God forbid. And I get in there, she runs out immediately, crying. And me and my stepmom just stood there, just taking it all in. It was difficult. My dad looked like he was in pain. He was frozen, not moving. Probably something that I would not have told anyone a year ago, that I've seen my dead dad. But I did, and at first it was sad, and then I thought, oh, he's not hurting anymore. And obviously, Our whole family had this other sort of pain, but he wasn't hurting. He had been hurting much longer than we had. But it was just a whole new ball game. And I looked at my stepmom, and it reminded me of this quote that my dad lived by. When you die to cancer, it does not mean that you lose. You beat cancer by how you live, why you live, and the manner in which you live. So live. Live, fight like hell, and when you get too tired to fight, lay down and rest, and let someone else fight for you. This is what had happened. My dad did not lose to cancer. Like I said multiple times, he fought hard. He couldn't do it anymore. It's a lot. 5.5 years of surgery and chemos, that's a lot on a person's body. That was it. And let me tell you, going back to school seemed like the end of the world. I wasn't in school for 17 straight days because of spring break, and then, this kind of happened. And so I went to school. I was very scared that people were going to start talking. I knew some already had, because when you miss a lot of school, people are, curious, they ask questions. And as I've learned over the years, people don't know how to respond to something traumatic. And especially teenagers who are just starting to venture into the world on their own. And I knew people would talk and things were gonna happen, but for the most part, it wasn't too bad. My teachers were good. They knew that things were going on. I would be trying to catch up and keep up in school, grieve, all sorts of things. I'm 16 now. It's been 2 years, and I'm still hurting, I'm still grieving, and truthfully, a part of me probably always will. But I have one thing that I want you to get out of this, and I need you to be open about it. Let people teach you something. The connections that I've made with people through Fight CRC, school, Kesem, all sorts of different things. That is how I've adapted to all these changes. I've let people come into my life, good or bad, to teach me things. It is impossible to compare life situations, yet it is crucial that we take the time to listen and try to understand to the best of our ability. So I leave you with that challenge. Go out and connect with people around you. Let them teach you something. Know that everyone responds differently to situations, and there's no right way to feel. Thank you.